Okay, we are live. I feel like I've become some kind of a professor YouTuber. It's not exactly what I signed up to do. So hi class again. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I've invited a former student of mine to discuss both how the Garcia girls lost their accents and then a very creative project that he did about a special needs child who needs technological assistance speaking and therefore has no accent, and what that means. But we'll get into that a little bit later. First, just we'll have a general conversation about the novel. I know it's not completely fresh for you, Jesse, but that's totally fine. Could you first introduce yourself and what you're doing and what your interests are in the program?
Of course. So my name is Jesse O'Brien, and I am actually a senior this year after a very, very long time trying to get my undergraduate degree. It's finally coming to pass, but I'm very excited. It'll be nice to do this during, COVID and everything, but I'm looking forward to it. So, I mean, my interests in this program are exactly what we did with this project, probably. It's something that wasn't just creative, but it's something I can use later on too. It's professional, it's personal, and it connected personally to my life in a way that I could help the student that I work with professionally. And it's it's something that I really put a lot of thought into and a lot of work into, and I feel like it gave me a new perspective and a new insight. And what else would you want when you're doing a project like this, whether it's creative or not, to give you some kind of new perspective into something you're doing professionally or even personally in this sense. So he's such a huge part of my life, the student that I work with, huge part of my life. And right now we're in isolation, so he's probably really tired of seeing my face all the time. It's just me and him. So, but he uses a device, an AAC device, to communicate, and he's really getting used to it as the years go on. He's starting to become more adept at using it, but it's frustrating. Every word that he says, everything that he says it has to come out through this device and has to be typed in letter by letter sometimes, and it's extremely frustrating for him. So
Right.
it's something that I felt really passionate about trying to understand. And the how the Garcia girls lost their accent was the perfect segue of this language and the effect and the impact that it has on our lives, and how we don't really understand how important it is until it's not there, or it's taken, or it's not adequate. And I know that that's something we talked about a lot, how language just is not adequate enough
Right.
in almost any situation.
Right. And that's really the point of this novel, which is that language does not ever adequately express desire. This is something that, of course, psychoanalytic critics talk about all the time, is that language is a cultural tool. It is contingent upon a social kind of agreement. It's not personal. Nobody invented the words that they have to use them. I think there's this piece in Gulliver's Travels. I haven't read that for a long time, but there's one land that Gulliver goes to where they have no language, they have no symbolism, and so they have to carry around everything they want to convey. So the burden of that, right? It's such a great image that language is something we have to use, or we'd have to carry around everything we want to convey, right? So think of when a child learns to say, I want a banana. If you can't say that, it becomes a massive kind of charade trying to convey that to someone else. But the problem is language is easily something that leads us astray. And in the very beginning of the novel, she is literally finding words that she cannot translate, right? So language is contingent upon the culture and the history that you inhabit. What is the word? It's craving. I'm trying to think what the word is that she wants guavas, and she's going around with this craving. But the family in the Dominican absolutely cannot translate that word properly for her. They said that, there is no English equivalent for this word, right? So that's the way the novel opens. It opens with the idea that language is a necessity, but it's not something that you can ever really own or express your desire in. Now, let me tell the class the story of how this project kind of evolved, because to me it was really wild. So Jesse comes in class one day and says, I'm doing something this week that's a little unusual. I'm not speaking at all. I'm going to only use this technological device. I'm going to type in all my thoughts, and then the class will wait, and then I'll hit play, and the machine will say everything I want to say about this novel. I'm like, okay, we'll see how that goes.
That did not work well on the first day.
It was like, okay. And didn't you lead the whole class around the student in this project? Didn't everybody have a week of silence where they had to write everything down?
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
So after I did my week of silence, I did it in school, of course, and at home. And so after that, the entire class that he was in, along with the teachers, they did a day. We did one full day. I mean, asking what were we, first graders at that point, asking first graders to go entirely silent for 15 minutes is extremely difficult. So
So
they
it's a day.
yeah, it was a day, but we did it mostly during lessons. We wanted them to see, as they tried to learn academically and tried to get out their thoughts and their wants, how difficult it might be if they were typing everything and had to put their thoughts into words, and just for the teachers to try to express things. So I did it for a week. That first class did not work out well with you. And I realized very quickly that I needed to prepare everything that I wanted to say in set notes ready to go that I could copy and paste into the device I was using, because that was extremely difficult. I would sit there for 10 minutes sometimes typing something in, and you realize very quickly that by the time you finished, that conversation was over.
Right.
Nobody was talking about it anymore. We were on to an entirely different subject.
Right.
So
You're like,
it made,
wait.
and it made no sense. And as much as you want to say, okay, let's give the wait time and let's wait because you want everyone to have their voice heard, it's not practical in our world, in the way that things work. We only have an hour and a half for class. We only have 50 minutes for class, or whatever it may be. And so it just wasn't practical. So I realized I had to prepare things, but it was difficult. And when you see the kids really took to it. They liked it as if it was almost a game, trying to make sure, write things on whiteboards, and they would hold it up. But I think it really engendered a kind of compassion that would not have been there before, because there were times where we'd be at circle, in the community circle, and it would come around to the child that I work with, and I would hear some of his friends, and not maliciously, just kind of like exasperated, like knowing that it might take some time for it to come, and knowing that it would, that we would have to wait. And if there's anything you don't like when you're in first grade, it's waiting, it's being patient. So they really got to understand how difficult it was to try to express yourself through not just language, and you don't even have the benefit of that stream of conscious, where even you could say it out loud and kind of put your thoughts together. It's, you have to have a full cohesive thought that you can put into written language, and then say it not just for yourself, but so that it can be understood by another person.
Right.
He must see the world entirely different. Just every social interaction is entirely different. So we did this, and I think it really helped everyone see that even though he has to use this device and he has to type in every word that he says, and it's extremely difficult to communicate things, it doesn't mean that it's not all inside of his head and he's not thinking all of it. It's just do I feel like taking the time to get those words out? Do I even care at this point? And it's a matter of trying to show him that we care what you put down. So please say it. And it is worth the effort. And we're
Mm-hmm.
not just kind of forgetting about you because of a wait time or because we know you have to put it into a device. It was really enlightening for everyone, and it was really nice. And we actually had NBC 10 come, and they interviewed him and his family, and they were able to kind of get insight into his disease, craw-based disease.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they really talked to his family about what they went through, and it was really nice. And they got to interview some of the kids and the students. So he got to feel really special. He got to feel like his, and even this word gets me, he got to feel like his disability was something like it should be. It was something, it was
Right. A different
dogs
ability.
barking.
Right.
Dogs,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, he's going to bark. My dog's going to bark, everyone, because we're having a car delivered that we had shipped from Georgia. And of course, it's arriving at exactly the time that we're doing a recording. But that's okay because we're all in the same boat. Not a problem.
I'm sure you'll hear mine soon.
Jesse, what you're reminding me of as well is that language is so deeply intertwined with higher thought. And so your intellectual ability and your linguistic ability rarely are in total alignment, right? I mean, anybody who struggles with writing or whatever knows this. The very first time that I taught college, it was 1995, and I was at Berkeley. I was so nervous, so young and so nervous, and I had a deaf student. So I had a signer who had to translate everything that I said. And you know how fast I go. So not only am I teaching and nervous and therefore sort of at a pace that probably should be slowed down, but words that I would use were so highly specialized, there was no sign for it. So every time I used a word like ideology or hegemony or, words that academics use, she had to spell it. Right? I apparently overtaxed her. She finally just said, you have to slow down, right? Because there's no sign for ideology. It's just not a common word, right? So you realize that certain sort of linguistic skills can define the event, right? And that's kind of the point. Like, I don't know if you remember the exam passage that I used, but my favorite moment in this novel is when Jolanda refuses to sleep with Rudy. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. I remember Rudy.
Because he defines the event in such crass terms, and she wants it in romantic terms. It's a different thing to get laid versus to have sex, to make love, right? The word itself defines the event. And that's another thing I love about this novel is it looks at a language of the body as disjunctive with language of the mind, right? And this is something that the parents in the novel really can't understand. Another moment I like is when the father rips up her graduation speech because she's so Americanized at that point, and he's not going to accept that. But language is sort of at the center of their tensions. Language bears their kind of cultural reality at that point. I was also, before we started the recording, we were talking about the fact that it's very difficult to keep the sisters straight in this novel, except for Jolanda, right? And there's all these moments where Jolanda is voiceless or renamed, right? People call her Jo, or, all kinds of things. And there's even a moment where you learn the mother's name. It's very striking. All of a sudden, she's Laura. She was just mother before that. And then sometimes it's first person and sometimes it's third person, and that's really important. So the whole thing is kind of making you engage with the centrality of language to sort of our cultural identity. And the class just read Bones, so they were already sort of looking at that with Layla and
yes.
Do you remember that novel?
I remember Bone, one of my favorites. I loved that novel, yes.
It's a wonderful novel. I love teaching it. I love looking at how the sort of psychodynamics work, because she's a translator. The main character is a translator and therefore sort of belongs nowhere but everywhere at the same time. What I love about this novel, oddly enough, it reminds me of Puritan culture, because Puritans, I love the Puritans. I know, like, that's not a shared love, but I love them because the Puritans had the same problem as the parents in this novel. They broke away from England for certain reasons and were kind of almost revolutionary in how they separated from England. But then they had a problem. They couldn't control their own community, and people who would act up, they would be like, you can't do that, right? And this is what's happening here, is the parents are revolutionary within the context of their own country, but they're super repressive when it comes to their daughters and American culture. I think it's hard to keep the sisters straight because that's the point. Is
I wonder if it's intentional. Yeah.
I think it is. Like, I literally, and they even have a chart of the family at the beginning, and I would literally take notes. Okay, the oldest wanted the red shoes. That's important, but ultimately, I don't think each person's story is important. I think the confusion is about the fact that they were kind of color-coded kids, right? They were given different colors to wear so the mother could remember who was them.
Yeah, even the mother didn't remember them. She had stories for each of them, and the color-coded, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the mother's a storyteller. I think, the mother even takes over. There's this scene where Jolanda's trying to do a poetry reading, and the mother is, Jolanda can't even get a word in edgewise because her mother is telling stories of when she was little. So I think the point is that they have a mass identity. And I think that's comforting, though. In that mass identity, they're able to sort of kind of best the parents, right? They hide weed. They rescue the youngest sister from a marriage they don't think is good for her in the Dominican, right? They kind of, as a body, have a sisterhood that kind of can upend the patriarchy, but at the same time, they struggle for individuation. And language has everything to do with that. Yeah. So that's why I love this novel. I also think it's it's wonderfully written. I think that the fact that the father can't deal with their American identity is both deeply understandable and also deeply problematic, right? So one of the things I remember Jesse doing in class with the typing of the ideas was continually writing essays about how patriarchy is encoded in language, right? And right, and how these women and their bodies and their experiences, their sexualities don't really have a presence in language, which is kind of what feminist psychoanalysts say, that we don't even know what a non-patriarchal language would look like, right?
That's interesting. Yes.
Right. That's what they say. They say, like, the female experience is not even, we don't even know what that would look like in terms of how it would be explained or what have you. So I think the novel's very much doing that. And you kept making that point. And I remember saying, because you had so much about that in your typed stuff, I remember thinking, like, I think you've already written your essay in your notes. Right?
I think I took a lot of my notes and put them into the essay and then cleaned it and put it into a cohesive thought. I remember doing that because there was so much of the way what I put down formed into a cohesive essay about that. Yes.
And honestly, that is my composition method. I never know what I'm going to do. I do a lot of free writing, and it's not until I put things in words themselves that I really can think about the meaning. I don't separate that drafting process. It's all one thing to me, and it's very much enabled by technology. I think you don't have to be quite as you have to be prepared, but you don't have to be so linear. You can sort of rearrange, work on things, draft, revise, go back, in a much more sort of liberating way. There's a lot of moments there, though, where the girls really can't speak, and I think that's really important. When the oldest one is subject to a guy who disrobes, right? He pulls over in a car.
Oh, yes. When she's at school and there's a little bit of an incident of almost, comes close to sexual assault.
It basically is. And she can't, she did the police are trying to talk to her, but she doesn't have a language to explain, and it's both English, but it's also sexuality. She doesn't have those languages yet because her family doesn't speak those things, right? And it's that moment when the police are interrogating is almost a second sexual assault because she feels violated. She doesn't have the words. Similarly, with two of the sisters wind up in institutions at one point.
Yes.
Right.
That's the one I remember clearly I remember Yolanda in the institution because she could only quote from novels that she had read before. She could only quote from things that she had read before, and she couldn't find her own language again. And it was about trying to discover her identity, but it was impossible to find that identity because she was so split between these two cultures that she started to think that she was aging backwards and that she was going to slowly cease to exist as a person altogether.
Right. And the fact that she can only quote literature, I think most of the literature she's quoting is male literature at that point. And even when she's trying to read poetry earlier, she's trying to express some erotic poetry, and her mother's taking over the scene, right?
Yes.
And she's not even understanding the poetry. Jelana feels like, oh, I probably shouldn't read this suggestive poetry in front of my mother. But her mother actually doesn't even process it. She listens and goes, what a fantastic imagination my daughter has. Like, even when you're saying something, it doesn't mean it will be understood, in any way, shape, or form. She seems to have this romantic perspective of going back to the Dominican Republic, but it doesn't hold up. There's this wonderful sort of matriarchy there, all these aunts, all these cousins, right, in the compound, but they're horrified that, the first thing she does is say, I'm going to go drive by myself and find guavas. And they're like, no, we do not do that here, right? So she wants to belong somewhere, but she's so embedded in American culture that's not going to really work out either, right? So that's why that word for craving that can't be translated is so important. There's this core sort of absence or loss or diaspora at the center of her existence. So let's move to the student you assist. He's not a child anymore, right? He's a teenager.
No, we're still, I know it feels like it's been forever, but he is 9.
Oh, he's only 9?
Yeah, he's 9 now.
Huh.
Yeah, I know it feels like it's forever, but you figure he was 7 when we did this. He'll be 10 very, very soon, but
yeah, I was thinking he might be more like 12 by now, but okay.
And that's also because the way I did the project is I wanted to make sure that I separated the two very firmly. And I made myself a teenager within the project from what the experience is, because I also wanted to tackle more adult issues, more mature issues. So I wasn't trying to be him so much as it was the aspect of what is it like when you don't have that language verbally. So it's very much based around him, but I wanted to make sure it was from a mature perspective, because there are things that I think about those social interactions as you grow of how is he going to handle them? How is he going to navigate them when he has only his communication device? And just trying to prepare him for that.
And so he knew you were doing the project,
yes,
right?
Yeah. Him and his parents both, yeah.
What did he think about it?
I think he thought it was, at that point, I think he just thought it was entertaining. Every time I would hit the device and my voice would come out of it, he would just look at me and just the biggest smile. And I don't know if it was amusement of I don't know if it was oh, that's so great that you're doing that, or it was really, really.
What is wrong with you? You don't have to use a device. I know. What are you doing, right?
And I tried to really explain it to him, look, this is the best way that I can help you too, is by trying to understand some of those frustrations, because there are moments where it becomes really frustrated, and it's of course. And I think that this was really necessary to understand why he was becoming so frustrated, what those feelings were. And I mean, some people's reactions, I had more than a few people get very angry at me and upset with me. I think they thought I was insulting them, or they thought that I was ignoring them maybe. but without a chance to explain. So
Right.
it is, yeah.
My father used to get he was he's passed now, but when he was a stroke victim, he would be really violent when he couldn't retrieve the word that he wanted. It
Yeah.
was like, it was stored in a weird part of the brain and he didn't have access to the right word. And it just, I mean, he physically looked like he was going to explode when he couldn't think of the right word. Now, do you want me to show them a part of the project as you talk it through?
Yeah, absolutely. That works.
All right.
Isn't that so much exactly what that antojo is, that desire, that word that they have for what they're looking for in how the Garcia girls? It's that antojo. It's trying to figure out with language how you can express this desire that you don't even have the language for to begin with. And it's almost describes entirely what language actually is without
Right.
it's never adequate enough. And I wish that it was, and we try to make it was, and it doesn't mean that we should stop trying, but it really isn't.
Although sometimes they use it, like there's this wonderful scene where they want to get the youngest sister in trouble so that she doesn't get stuck in the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
And they say, we need to go back now because we're on our girl time, right? And the minute they say that, their cousin's like, oh, okay. Oh, we better, like there's this sort of codified femaleness that they can root through as a system of empowerment, right? They can sort of like change the patriarchy by calling upon what language can accommodate, which is like, hey, we have our periods, you better drive us back, right? So it's both oppressive, the fact that they're not in language, but it also can be used, right, as a tool of empowerment. So that's another way that I like the novel can do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see the way it can shape perception entirely
Mhm.
of what they say and what they want others to say. Yeah.
So what do you want me to show one of the clips here?
So yeah, let's show one of the clips. I think it's awkward to watch and it's a little uncomfortable, which it should be. And I think I think that's the best way to kind of show it.
Okay.
My name is Jesse. This is my project for my literature of adolescence groups. Focus on how language creates and defines reality and how the Garcia girls lost their accents.
So this is the one where I am speaking, my intro.
Whether it's through its creation of a male dominated culture of female oppression, or language's dichotomous role of connecting individuals, yet being wholly inadequate in that aspect and unable to do so. Through the lens of an augmentative and alternative communication user and the use of a communication device, I want to portray language's role in our culture. How
Do you want me to do one of the ones um, where you're using the device?
Yeah, I think so, just for the sake of time too. So it's anyone's after that. I liked the very first one,
December?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sure, I could have chosen an accent. I could have chosen male 3 UK or maybe male 12 Australian, and I would have had one of the thickest accents in school. No, I decided to play it safe when I got my talker and choose male 1 American. Now I have the same accent as almost all of my peers. Besides, it wouldn't do me any good because all anybody hears is a computer voice coming out of a speaker, not my mouth. In fact, every word I'm saying now was typed out first with emotion behind it as I thought it into existence. Again, I'm sure all any of you hear though is the monotonous voice of a robot. Plus, I think I'm going to choose to make it female for my website just to get my point across and make you all very uncomfortable at first. That is what I do, make people uncomfortable or just make them feel sad. I should introduce myself. My name is Jesse Hutchinson and I am a 16-year-old sophomore in high school. You may have guessed this already, but I need a device to communicate. I call it my talker, but other people call it an AAC device, short for Augmentative and Alternative Communication Device. I have to use it because I got sick when I was younger. I won't go into all the details because that's not what this is about, but it affected my ability to talk and move. I have to use a power chair to get around, my movement isn't great all around, and I can't speak verbally. The hardest part of all of it is that my mind wasn't affected at all. Well, the hardest part for those around me, I should say. If my mind wasn't affected, then why do I interact with others so differently, or why do act so differently in general? I don't feel like I do. I feel like I act like me, but that doesn't mean I can't see the difference. I know why though. It all comes down to language. People have talked to me a certain way since I was a baby, or not talked to me at all. You know, they say by kindergarten an AAC user is exposed to only a tenth of the language an average child is. Not to mention all my interactions were with adults, and there was no stage where my parents got to say, "Oh my God, Jesse just said mom," or anything that comes after that. Anyway, my point is that language is the difference, and I'm going to figure out what I want to say about it. I'm honestly not sure I know exactly what it is I want to say. Maybe I can say it without actually saying it like I usually do. I do know, I want to type it into this program and have a ridiculous sounding female voice which doesn't match my facial features at all say every word of it. For once, I want to be truly heard. Or maybe, just seen. I mean really seen. What I can tell you is this has to do with language. It has to do with how language has controlled and influenced every choice I have ever made in every aspect of my life. Many of you probably take for granted your ability to communicate and use language, but let me be the first to tell you, it sucks not being able to communicate freely with the world. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy not speaking to people or disappearing into my own head, but sadly, communicating with others is necessary in our socially driven world. That's probably why my mom has been on my case so much. Actually, that's a good place to start.
How does it feel watching yourself having done the project?
It's really strange going back, but it brought up a lot of emotions, but it's really strange. The those silences are very uncomfortable, and I liked it, of course. I can't imagine, I don't know how your class is going to feel with those moments of silence, but I liked the silence in between. Like, I started to feel very uncomfortable, and I had to kind of look like, wait, what's good? And you don't realize how long it is, but
Mm-hmm.
it's that uncomfortable silence is a fact. And there's just so many things that I went through that, as I was like going back through it, that brought up like different emotions and things that I was feeling. It's so strange seeing yourself on video, though. It definitely is.
I'm starting to get used to it. In fact, I was thinking a couple things while I was looking at this. This is poignant in our remote need to work right now. right? I am constantly recording videos. I have a YouTube panel to do on Friday, and it's terrifying. I'm going to be with a panel of scholars talking about Anne of Green Gables on the spot, and this is terrifying. I did not sign up to be a media star. I can address a room, but usually I'm gauging what I say based on people's responses to me. In fact, what I noticed watching this time is how expressive your body language was. It's like you are illustrating what the machine is saying with your body, right? As if you can't just let the machine do it for you, right? At the same time, I was thinking, you could change your voice. You could be female if you wanted to be. You could be British. You could be Australian, right? Like there's this weird way that it changes identity, right? Or possibilities at the same time that it makes people uncomfortable, right? Which is very much like internet culture, right? It's kind of what it is. It's both pluralistic and decentering of a core identity. It's both of those things. That's what's going on in this novel. They're both those things, not being able to express yourself fully in one language or the other. How did you come to doing this project? Like what was the moment that you were reading this or thinking about this that made you go, I know what I can do?
Wow. So I think absolutely the moment that it really, really got me was it wasn't during the fact when I wasn't speaking. It was definitely after the fact, but there were a lot of moments in there where I was thinking, I need to do more than this. I need to show more than this.
Mhm.
I don't know if just me is getting across the point that I want to get across or if I'm learning enough from it. So it was during one of our discussions, and I think it was after class actually, one of our discussions about language, and we were talking about how it just doesn't work and it holds us back. And then we had brought up the uncomfortable silence. And I know we've talked about this before, how the uncomfortable silence is fine for some people. You will just sit there and, just wait. It pushes people to kind of say something because they can't handle it and they can't handle that silence. And I remember thinking how awkward that would be on a video when you have to watch it back and you have to stare at a silent person as you kind of wait. And there's there's a pause button and there's a fast forward button, but there's almost less escape in that situation where you're viewing a continuous video than there is in person. In person, you almost can kind of get away from it, or maybe turn and socially talk to another person. And there were so many times where I would pause for a minute and the conversation would change and I would be forgotten about. I remember when I wasn't speaking. So, but in this situation, you're focused in and you have to just sit through that uncomfortable silence, and it makes you listen more to what's coming. And with how the Garcia girls lost their accent, it was that struggle between Rudy and Yolanda. I mean, not just to come back to that, because I remember he had written this love poetry, and the way he wrote it down was what I think first attracted Yolanda to him, to Rudy. The way he put the language into words. And then they get in this situation where his actual spoken language isn't enough. They don't translate to each other at all. The two of them cannot have a relationship because the way he speaks is so crass and free and American, and the way she speaks and her language has kind of colored her perception in a way that she doesn't see it that way, that it's more special and it's meant to be with someone special. But it also makes her question herself, where she's like, well, am I too uptight? Am I not free enough? Should I change myself for him? And the complexities of that chapter entirely, of him writing the love poetry. And I remember the pencil she had where it was so shaved down to like just a piece of her name. And she gave it to him. And I mean, the symbolism and that the metaphor there, and just that entire chapter, I thought really defined that whole book for me and made me really want to do this and to do it in interview style with that uncomfortability where you had to hear the words, but you had to hear them written into the talker and you had to listen to it.
That I love that chapter. He has an American flag on his bed, right? And there's so much about how American culture cheapens every value that they brought with them. For example, the Mary Bank is a good example of that, right? It's the Mary Bank, like, really, right? Which breaks, and the maid treats it as this revered kind of sacred object because she's not American, right?
Yes.
Let me stop sharing. So I left that up so they could read your introduction if they wanted to. It is project time, so I'm trying to get them to think of creative, professionally interesting, personally interesting projects that they can do. So how are you going to use this project? You're a senior. This means that you'll be on the job market soon, or grad school, whichever looks better. How are you going to situate this? Like, you're in an interview, how would you explain in, like, sort of a small snippet, almost a cocktail party conversation, how do you explain the value of this project?
So the project is going to be prominent on my portfolio page. We do the portfolio for Travis Dubois. He has the portfolio course for all English majors. So I have it prominently on there. It's one of my actual sections and that's included in my resume, because this project, I think when I can show it to employers, it shows something very unique about my perspective and my interaction with education and special education specifically. And that through this project and the knowledge that I've gained and the perspective that I've gained from this program, I can understand disability and I can understand special education and education in general in a way that is wholly unique to me because of the classes that I've taken and because of what I've done from those courses. And it's not just with this even too. There was also the novel or the graphic novel I did about through Alice in Wonderland. Even through that, looking at those two different things, it gave me a brand new perspective to see how the holes and the gaps in special education, where we're lacking and where we're missing, and how we can better serve not just Zachary being nonverbal or whatever it may be, but the entire special education population. And I think that that's really important because there are serious holes in it still, and there are serious gaps where their needs are being missed and they're not being met. So with these different perspectives and seeing things from their point of view, or at least trying to, and making that attempt, something can finally be changed. We can add new things. We can find different ways to reach a population that I think we tend to group sometimes as if we all learn the same. And I think we really need to remember at all times that nobody does.
Yeah, my oldest daughter was on the autistic spectrum, Asperger's really, but I guess it went away as its own thing now. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. But what I noticed when she had a lot of trouble mastering language, she had a speech disability on top of the autism. People would talk about her in front of her as if she wasn't there, which I found so strange. I took her to so many interventionists and this and that. And because she did not speak, it was like she didn't exist. And I was like, yeah, can we not talk about her in front of her? That's kind of, same thing with my dad. He didn't have language when he first had the stroke, and people would speak as if he wasn't completely listening, and he just couldn't speak, And so it's so much a part of our assumptions of humanity and civilization, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think your work has implications for ESL as well. Just coming back to the novel and sort of the analysis you've done, linking language and self. clearly has applications to ESL in the classroom, right? Where, language and thought become so intertwined that there's definitely discrimination against students who are ESL, or even the 1.5 generation, which is people who, were born here but grew up with a different language in the home. And, not only does it have implications for ESL, but I think kind of analytically for everybody, right? Everybody has some kind of a gap between their expressivity and their ability to understand. There's always a gap between comprehension and expressivity. That's, just what it is. All right. So any last thoughts? We have probably done what we can do in our time. Any last thoughts for the students to inspire their getting through this strange remote semester?
I know, and I know that they don't know you personally, but as they go on, I'm hoping that they really start to understand you as a professor, because the freedom and the creativity that I felt to really go for something unique and creative was so important. And it is something that I am so grateful for, because these projects never would have came without that. So, and I just want to say to the students that Dr. Blackford really has a way of allowing you to find something that's personal, meaningful, and that interests you, and using the novels that you're going through and the discussions that you're having about literature and combining them into something meaningful like this. I mean, these didn't take a day or two. They took weeks of kind of thinking and going through different pieces, but the end product is so worth it. And even if it's just, I mean, I know even with the Alice book, it was not completely finished, but I was able to give you a storyboard and to give you a full, complete product to an extent, but without the illustrations, things like that, and kind of said, I'll bring in illustrations later. They're not the important part here. And it's something that I continued to work on afterwards. How many things can you say that about?
I think that, I strongly encourage the multimedia projects, particularly relevant to your professional goals. But of course, it's selfish, because no English teacher wants 40 research papers, really. I just want to point that out, that it's the variety for me. It's not like it's not for me as well.
Yeah, but really, when you go to an employer professionally, are you going to hand them a research paper? I have some research scholarly papers on my portfolio, but they're not what I'm focused on. They're not what I'm trying to zoom in. It's the other projects. It's, when an employer sees something like this, they can zoom in on it and kind of be like, oh, wow, this is different. I just read through 40 resumes. Let me just click on this and see what this is. And it wouldn't have been possible without this class, because this opportunity to do a project like this that means something academically, professionally, and personally doesn't exist in every single class or every program for that matter. So at Rutgers, I was at other schools before too. It's unique to this program. It's unique to this course in some ways. So it's really take advantage of it and use it, because in these novels like Bone, I still remember How the Garcia Girls, that there are pieces in there that really can connect to anyone personally. They have universal themes that just really spoke to me, and that was with a lot of the novels we did. So
yeah, I tend to have my favorites and kind of teach them over and over and over again, but each class does something different with them, so it doesn't get stale, I think. Although I try to do something new each time. This class is ending with Kindred by Octavia Butler.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if you know it, but
Octavia Butler, yes.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. And actually, my own daughter studied it in high school, so she's going to do the next talk with me. She's 15. It was her summer reading, and so we had a lot of good conversations about it. Too bad I didn't record them. I didn't know this was going to be my life. But it's the same kind of thing. It's I try to do something new, but I also try to do things that I know work and are very teachable and can inspire, sort of things like this. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, and thank you for your time. And let me stop the recording. All right, thanks, class.
Bye.